Hi guys, so this week in Bible we are talking about the fear of failure. And the reason why I want to talk about this is because we all have fears. If I was to ask you right now to list your fear, you would probably think of several things off the top of your head. And there are some fears that even if you have them, you can get away from them. Okay, like I have a fear of bridges, but I don't go over a bridge every single day. And I can avoid a bridge. Like if I know there's a way to travel where there's a big, humongous bridge, or there's a way to travel without the bridge, I'm gonna pick the way to travel without the big, huge bridge, right? If you're afraid of giant snakes, right? Like anacondas or rattlesnakes, how often do you really have to be around rattlesnakes? Not that often. But the fear of failure is something that you really can't get away from sometimes because it is with you every minute of the day. If you are really concerned about what other people will think if you fail at something, or you are so concerned that you're not going to do something correctly, or that when you try at something you always fail, and that fear of failure just is in your head all of the time. So I want to tell you what you can do about the fear of failure and how you can get it out of your life and how you can deal with it. And that's why the packet this week is called Overcoming the Fear of Failure. It looks like this. This is a two-part video. There's going to be part number 1 where I'm going to talk about one of the disciples of Christ that failed and what Jesus did about that. And so you're going to take notes here and here, okay? And then I'm also going to, in this video, answer your questions that are on this paper right here. We're going to fill in these key points about the fear of failure. And then you're going to have to watch video number 2 for the second set of questions. And then it's just a bunch of scriptures. I'm going to go over scriptures that you can have with you all of the time that can help you to, again, overcome this humongous fear that can sometimes get even bigger. It can turn into this big monster that we don't want it to be. Okay, my biggest fear is the fear of failure because I can deal with most things, but knowing that I failed at something, especially something that I feel like I was good at or God called me to do, and then I fail at it, it will just sink me so low. You guys, and we're faced with this all the time, but there are 2 choices that you can do when you're faced with fear. One, and this is the very front of your paper, you guys, it talks about this right here, number 1. You can let it define you and you can let it make you sink so low. I mean, you can really let the darkness set in and the lies set in and the feelings of insecurity set in and not rely and trust in God and sink so low that you stop doing things that God's called you to do because you're so afraid of failing. It will keep you in life from saying yes to things because you don't want to fail, not only to yourself, but you don't want to fail in front of other people. Or you can take option number B and you can let these failures in your life teach you a lesson and let it be used to let you grow. So often I hate the fear of failure so much that I try to avoid it. I try to only do things that I'm good at because I don't want to fail in front of people. But it's the times that I fail. This just recently happened last week. I thought I was really, really good at something and then I failed at it. And it brought me to such a humble place that it actually caused me to surrender and to trust in God and rely on Him. So it's the failures in our life that actually teach us the most. If you were to listen to the biography of any famous person, they would tell you it was the failures that made them who they were. And how many times did they have to fail before they got it right, before they were used by God to do something amazing? Okay, there was a disciple in the Bible that also did this, and his name was Peter. And I love Peter because he's so bold, and there's actually books in the Bible written about him, 1st, 2nd Peter. He's an amazing disciple, but he failed. He failed several times, and one of those times was when he denied Christ. So I'm going to read this to you, and then you guys are going to take 3 notes here. Note A, note B, note C. Just take a note on something that happened. Okay, I'm reading out of the book of John. The story of Peter denying Christ is in the Gospels, but specifically it's in John 18. Let me make sure I'm on the right part. Okay, John 18, verse 15, okay? Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with the high priest into the courtyard. So they had just arrested Jesus. This was right before he was crucified. And Peter was following close behind him because he wanted to know what was going to happen. But they did not allow Peter to go inside. He had to wait outside the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. And this is what the servant girl says to Peter. "You're not one of the disciples, are you?" the girl at the door asked Peter. And his reply was, I am not. It was cold, and the servants and officials stood around a fire they had made to keep warm, and Peter was also standing with them, warming himself. So you guys, it seems crazy to me that Peter, one of the disciples who followed along with Jesus, would actually deny him at the point where he was going to be crucified. And Jesus had also told Peter that you will deny me. And he's like, Lord, I would never do that. But yet again, he did that. And so I want to talk in a few minutes about what leads us to the point of failure and kind of what are some things that we can do to get better. But, as much as it surprises me that why Peter would do something like that, it doesn't, because we're all human. That's part of it. Sometimes we think we can't make mistakes, and like every single person makes mistakes, including Peter, because he was human. The only reason he could do the things that he did as a disciple is because he had Jesus. The moment we take our eyes off Jesus is when we start to fail. This also happened to Peter when he was walking on water, and he was so bold to take a step out of the boat and to walk on water and go towards Jesus. I love his boldness and his courage, but he took his eyes off Jesus because he's human, and that's why we need a savior in the first place. But that was not the first time that Peter denied Christ. He denied Christ 3 times, which Jesus said he was going to. So if you skip a few verses and you go over, this is again John 18 verse 25. It said, as Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, you're not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it again, saying, I am not. So he's making a conscious decision to say that he wasn't one of the disciples. One of the high priest's servant, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had already cut off, challenged him, saying, didn't I see him with you in the Olive Garden? Again, Peter denied it again, and that moment a rooster began to crow, which is what Jesus said was going to happen. So Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Now, wouldn't you think that Jesus would say, you know what, I'm done with Simon Peter. He cannot be used. I gave him an opportunity. I told him he was going to deny me. I gave him an opportunity to correct it, and he still did it anyways. There's no way I'm going to use a disciple like that. Wouldn't you think Jesus would think like that? But no, if you go a few chapters over, and it's chapter 21, so again, just a few short chapters over, it was after he had risen from the dead, and Peter and the disciples were fishing, and it says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that was Jesus. He called out to them saying, friends, haven't you any fish? So here is a disciple that denied Jesus, and yet when Jesus comes up to the shore and he sees that disciple in the boat, he still calls all of them his friends. He doesn't hold bitter resentment. He doesn't say, you know what, you've screwed up so bad, there's no coming back from that. And then he says, throw your nets on the right side of the boat and you will find some. And they threw their nets and they caught fish and they came up. And I love this part. It said, then the disciple whom Jesus loved, which we know is John, said to Peter, it is the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him and jumped into the water. Again, the boldness of Peter. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire burning coals with fish on it and some bread. So Jesus is here serving them. Even after he denied Jesus, Jesus is still showing love and serving them and making them breakfast. And Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. And then he goes on into this chapter, and he tells Peter to feed his sheep. Do you love me? He has this conversation, an amazing conversation with Peter, but never once does he bring up the fact that he failed. And never once does he say, you know what, Peter, I got to call you over here for a minute. I don't think you can be my disciple anymore. Jesus was always loving. And even when you have a failure, it's not final. It's not the end. It doesn't mean you can't be used by God if you make a mistake or you do something. It just means you need to rely on God, get yourself back up, and start a new day, because God has grace and mercy always. Okay, I want you to be able to fill out this sheet, because we don't want to just talk about our fear of failure. We want to talk about how we get into that place in the first place. How did Peter get into that place? And then what we can do to get better. A lot of times when I make a video, if I make it too long, it just takes forever to load, and it's not good for you guys. You can't sit there that long. And so I'm going to kind of go through these points a little quickly. If you need to stop the video and pause it and write and then restart it, okay? So again, it says you have two choices when it comes to failure. You can let it define you, you can sink in it, you can sink low, or you can use it as a growing experience to learn from. And so often we choose to let it cause us to sink. And I'm gonna show you how not to do that so that you can use your failures as a way to grow. Again, 3 notes about Peter denying Christ. You can pick anything out of the story that I just told you. It is in the book of John. You can go back and read it for yourself and write notes on your own from that. Okay, but on the back, it says, what are 3 things that often lead us to failure? Number 1 is overestimating our strengths. Overestimating our strengths. This is the number 1 way that I always get myself in trouble is pride. I always think that I'm so good at something that I don't need to rely on God. It's the same thing that happened to Peter when he was walking on the water. He's like, I got this. Look at me. I'm walking on water. I'm doing great. And we overestimate how great we are at something instead of realizing that we need God in everything that we do. Because then we get to the point of failure and we're like, we blame it all on ourselves because we took it all on ourselves, and then we sink low. But if we would have let God help us through whatever task that was, we wouldn't be in that position in the first place, because we know whatever we're doing, whatever we're able to do is because God has allowed us to do it. Number 2, this one's huge. I think you guys would all say this. Number 2, we care too much what other people think. This is something that will cause us to feel like a failure. When we look around us, and oh my gosh, someone did that better than us. Someone has better grades than we do. Man, that person just always seems like they have it together. Why can't I get it together? Why am I always such a failure? And when we start comparing ourselves with other people, we get kind of in a rut, and then God can't use us to do anything. So we need to stop caring so much about what other people think and start caring about what Christ thinks of us. This can actually lead us to do 3 things that are not good for you. So evaluate yourself, and if you're doing these 3 things, you need to start thinking today of some ways that you can change. Number 1, they all start with P, is people pleasing. If you are a people pleaser, realize today that that is not God's plan for your life. He doesn't want you to be a people pleaser. He wants you to wake up in the morning and thinking about what His will is. And yeah, if you're in God's will, you're gonna also make some other people happy, because God's gonna be able to use you to minister to other people. But you shouldn't wake up every day thinking, man, what can I do to make this person happy? What can I do to make my friends happy? What can I do to make my mom, my dad, everyone happy? Because you can never make everyone happy. And you're always gonna feel like a failure when you do that, because there's always gonna be somebody that's gonna not be happy. Number 2, when you care too much what other people think, it leads to perfectionism. Perfectionism is not good for anyone, because we're not perfect. The only way we can do anything is because we have Christ. So if you're trying to live up to this ideal of something that God never planned for you, you're gonna end up falling short when you rely on yourself. Okay, and the 3rd thing that it leads to is procrastination and self-sabotage. This one's a big one. It's like sometimes I'll have a to-do list that is a mile long, and I have all of these things that I know God wants me to do, and just things that need to be done. Clean my house, do my schoolwork, even now make videos. But what I'll start to do is I'll start comparing myself with other people. I'll start thinking that I know it all, and then I procrastinate because I think, well, I can't be as good at Miss McCreary when she makes her videos, so it makes me not want to make any videos. And then we just start sinking low, and then we can't even get off the couch to do the to-do list that we have. So if you notice you're procrastinating a lot, maybe stop and think, is it because you're relying on your own strengths and not allowing God to help you? Okay. All of these things, caring too much about what other people think, and being a people pleaser, and procrastinating, and being a perfectionist, stop for a second and think, do you have those tendencies? Do you have the tendency to always want to make everybody happy? If you do, that's usually from some deep wound or deep hurt. It didn't just come there overnight. You didn't just become a people pleaser overnight. So be thinking and bring that deep hurt, that deep wound before God, and say, God, I have this deep hurt. I have this deep pain of something that happened that's causing me to be this way. But God, I lay it at the foot of the cross and give it to you. And that's going to let you have a new start to trust and rely on Him with those things. Okay, the next thing that got Peter into trouble, not only did he overestimate his own strengths, not only did he care too much what other people thought, but 3, he was acting and speaking without thinking. So often we make impulsive and emotional decisions when he was there in the courtyard and someone asked him if he knew Christ, he immediately just spurted out without thinking about the ramifications of it. And then he did it again and again. Guys, I'm sure you're reading that and going, how did he do it 3 times? But how do we do some of the stupid things that we do sometimes? It's because we're human and we do make mistakes. So again, realize if you have just recently made a mistake and you feel like, man, I am such a screw up, God cannot use me, please know that he can. Because if you read the Bible over and over again, he used the disciples even though they made a ton of mistakes. But they loved him and they went to him and they asked for forgiveness. Now Judas Iscariot was one who made a huge mistake and he didn't ask forgiveness. And you know what ended up happening to Judas? He ended up committing suicide. He ended up hanging himself because he never went back to God and he never trusted God. And so again, it's just about, even if you make a mistake, going before God and just sharing your mistake and saying, God, I know I'm full of mistakes, but that's why I need a savior. Okay, what can we do to trust God in the midst of failure? So there's 4 things on here. First of all, don't let the devil use your triggers. We all have these triggers that sink us low. We all have these triggers that make us go into a place of just feeling like we're nothing, feeling like we're not worthy. Instead, when those triggers come, because they're gonna come, maybe it's when you're with your family and your sister or brother or someone in your family is really good at almost everything and your mom or dad always brags on your sister and brother. If you know that's a trigger for you, don't let the devil use that. You know it's coming. So when it comes, decide in that moment that you're gonna praise God anyways. They're gonna go, you know what? I'm thankful I have a brother or sister who is so talented. And I'm so glad that I'm talented at so many things. What can I do to support them? And how can they use their strengths to help me? And how can I use my strengths to help them? Now, that's not easy to do. It's extremely not easy to do. But if you do that, it will keep you from sinking into feeling like you're always failing and like you're not good enough. Okay, number 2, let friends come around you and support you. So after Peter failed so bad, he didn't go and hide himself from all of the other disciples. One, he ended up fishing with them and he had this beautiful experience with Jesus where Jesus came and served them breakfast and he had this amazing conversation. But then 50 days later in Pentecost, Jesus was able to use him to preach and win so many people to Christ. And it was the beginning of the first churches, right? And so he didn't say, man, I have screwed up, so I'm never going to be used by God again. Whenever you feel like you have a failure, one of the greatest things to do is to just share it with a really good friend and say, man, I'm feeling low today. I'm feeling like I really messed up. Can you help me? Can you come around me and support me and encourage me? And they will. Number 3, don't hold on to shame. Don't hold on to shame. Be authentic. Again, don't hold on to these failures in your life and let the devil use them against you. Be real, be authentic, be like, I've had failures in my life. Some of the most amazing testimonies is when people are real and they share the things that have happened to them and God can use it to win more people to him. And then the last thing is work on ways to build your self-confidence. You've got to look for small ways to have small wins if you're always feeling like a failure. Think of something you're really good at and use that to glorify God. In the packet this week, I give you guys kind of a confidence challenge. Obviously, that challenge is better when you're with a bunch of friends. Doesn't really do much good when we're in quarantine, but you can try. There's some quotes there that you can read. But again, focusing on your strengths and things that you're good at and using that to give you some wins and to glorify God will help you with not feeling like a failure. Okay, this video is already 18 minutes. That's quite a long time. Listen to video number 2, part 2, to hear the Bible verses to fill out the rest of your worksheets. And again, this week we're going to be talking about what happens when that fear of failure comes over your life and gets in your mind and keeps you from God's purposes, because God has big plans for all of your lives. Bye.